It's okay. Yeah. Should we? A bit, better. Thank you, bro. Yeah, but at least it looks neater, you know. It looks neater. Hare Krishna. Welcome, devotees, Prabhus, Matajis. Let's start by just chanting for maybe a minute or two. It's always good for us to do that. And then I think maybe some devotees may join us. I was told to start at 2:45 because there are devotees, I think, still honoring prasadam. So that's going on, right? Yeah. And there's a golden rule. We should never get, in between prasadam and devotees. Not very good. They should always have their prasadam. So we just chant Krishna's names for a few minutes and then we can start. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaura Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Shri Prabhupada ki, Jai Shri Gurudev ki, Ananta Kori Vaishnavrinda ki, Nitai Gaura Premanande. So we welcome all devotees today. This is the afternoon session, and the topic that I was given to speak and share with you is a very interesting topic. It is well known today in the world of leadership. If you have been in the secular world, you will know that this has become much more popular and relevant today than it is at any time in management and leadership. The topic is actually the servant leader, a spiritual perspective. And for those who also joined me for the last session, I will hand over the slides and copies of them to the organizers. I only hope that they'll be able to distribute it to all the participants, because sometimes it may be helpful for you. You can always feel free to edit it, to improve on it, and to change it according to the audience that you want to speak to, right? None of this knowledge is proprietary in nature. Everything is coming from Sastras and Srila Prabhupada, and therefore it always should be shared. So today's topic is a perspective. That's what we're trying to do, right? We're having some reflections on what it means to be a servant leader. And a servant leader, it's not just a term. We sometimes get into the habit of speaking in such a way that we don't realize that we may just throw words around, but ultimately, whether or not we're acting on it is a different story. And so, whenever we speak about these terms, I think it becomes important for us to reflect on them and think of them in terms of perspective. I'm going to stand because I realize that I'll not be able to see many of you behind. And this way, I think you can also see me, so that's better. Okay, this is a beautiful picture, and it shows us a very important element of servant leadership. Krishna here in the 10th canto, to the amazement of the queens who are behind in Dwarka, in Dwarka, he's just sitting there, and Mother Rukmini is next to him, and he's washing the feet of Sudama. And you know that Sudama traveled all the way from Porbandar to Dwarka. And if you have been to that part of Saurashtra, you will know that's at least 180 to 200 kilometers. That's a lot of walk. And he did it. And when he reached there, right, he came inside. And at that time, Krishna was actually seated exactly where you see Sudama was seated. If you go to Dwarka and you go to an island known as Dwarkanath, Dwarka Bed Dwarka, there's a beautiful deity of Dwarkanath. And that's the palace that we are speaking about here. And here is the place where Krishna was seated, and he was having talks with Rukmini Mata, and then he saw Sudama. And when Sudama came in, Krishna is the supreme leader. He is the leader of all devotees. He is the leader of all living entities. He is known in Bhagavatam as Bhagavan Sattvatam Patihi. That means he is the leader of all living entities in this world. And yet this supreme leader found it fit to stand up, and immediately he embraced Sudama, who was actually a childhood friend of his, and who actually became a Brahmana of great value and a wonderful devotee, but he lived in very poor, materially poor conditions. Spiritually, he was very enlivened, but materially, he was very poor. And you all know that his wife and him had discussed that they should somehow or another, that he should meet Krishna. And he wanted to come to see Krishna, Not because he needed anything from Krishna, but more because it was an opportunity to be able to see Krishna and to take darshan of him. When Krishna saw Sudama, he actually placed him on the bedstead where he was seated, and he started washing his feet. And if you read this part of Bhagavatam 10th canto, you will know that he applied so much of ointment, sandalwood to cool him down, and then after that he washed his feet. And he did it all very, very lovingly. So this actually tells us something very nice. Sometimes in the material world, when we get the idea that we are being used or we are being treated as a servant, it is not often a very nice feeling. And sometimes we feel that, well, if we have a position or we have a designation, then we should be treated better, and we should not be treated as if we are just one of the people. That is very easy. It's not difficult for leaders to feel that, and it's a fact. Very often it happens. Even if we may be sophisticated in not showing it outwardly, because we know that sometimes etiquette demands that we don't show that. But how do we feel inside is very important, which is why the topic today is a perspective, because a perspective denotes something that should be coming from the heart. So Sudama was treated so wonderfully by Krishna, and all that time he felt that this was amazing. In fact, by the time Sudama went to bed, Bhagavatam tells us, and he lay on the bed, and the bed felt like feathers, Bhagavatam says Sudama thought that I must have died and gone to heaven, because it feels so unreal. So actually it shows us when a leader actually serves with his heart, the way Krishna serves Sudama, the experience that the person who is served actually feels is positively heavenly, and it's a genuine experience. And people become so inspired when they are served in that manner. So there is great value to the idea of a loving servant of the most loving master. So this is a very interesting point actually that comes. And even though servant leadership is so common and vogue today in the material world, there's so much of it actually in Bhagavatam. And that's why I think the organizers have chosen to choose this very important point. The fact of it is, when you look at the word servant, servant is derived from the idea of service. And actually, what we don't realize very often is that we all have an innate spirit of serving. And Bhagavatam shows us, Srila Prabhupada tells us in his purports very often, if you look at the world and you observe it, all of us who are in positive, loving relationships, we're actually all serving each other. Friends serve one another. Mother serves the son, and if the son is filial, the son also serves the mother. Fathers serve children, and children serve fathers. Sometimes you also will find that husband and wife in a mutual relationship of understanding, respect, they will also serve one another. It will never be one way. It will be two ways. If you look at the broader society today, politicians convince public that they will render valuable service. They convince. Whether they do it or not is a different story. But they are very, very sharp to know that if someone feels that they will be served, then they know they may get their votes. Because they even understand that actually service is very important to humanity. The shopkeeper serves the customer. The artisan serves the capitalist serves the family, and the family serves the state. If you've done economics, you will know this is how things work. Service is the constant companion of every living being. We cannot deny that. Everywhere we go, we are serving someone. And if we claim that I'm not serving someone, everyone is serving me, then very often unknown to us, we may also be servants of our own minds. And we may be serving our mind more than we think is actually happening. So everywhere service is happening, and that's a very important thing. And the eternal occupation of humanity is actually embedded in service. Because the entire Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Bhagavad Gita, it all tells us the common point that we should render service in devotion to the Supreme Lord. Srila Prabhupada did not define bhakti as devotion. Srila Prabhupada defined bhakti as devotional service, because the service element is a very important part of devotion. In fact, service is an expression of our devotion. So therefore, it is very much within our own constitutional position to serve. In so many of our purports, Srila Prabhupada makes it a point that actually our constitutional nature, and we will become happy, he says, is when we actually serve Krishna. And that satisfies the self. Sometimes in the material world, it's very difficult for us to understand that by serving someone else, we become satisfied. Generally, the idea is if you want happiness, make sure people serve you. But in the material world, you will realize that even people who may not be spiritually inclined the way we think they should be, good people in the world, there are plenty of good people in the world, you find that even they understand that the value of service is very often that when you extend yourself in the service of others, you actually become satisfied. You derive some level of satisfaction. Ask the charity workers, ask those who are performing social service, and very often they will tell you that money is never the motivator. It's the satisfaction that we get. So what more about devotees then? Devotees are connected to Krishna. So actually we must understand that everything that's happening in this world is centered on service. And that is why in Bhagavatam, this point is addressed by Shukadev Goswami way at the start of Bhagavatam. Savai pumsam paro dharmo, yathor bhakti radok saje, ahaituki apratihata, yena atma suprasidati. The way to become satisfied in this material world is really on the platform of service to the transcendental Lord. And it is done in two ways. It is done, first of all, without motive, which is material. And because it is not motivated by anything material, then it becomes uninterrupted. Sometimes people ask the question, which one should come first? Should we have unmotivated service and then it becomes uninterrupted? Or should we perform our service uninterrupted and then it becomes unmotivated? Srila Prabhupada explains this in the 6th canto, 16th chapter, 34th verse. It's in the 2nd paragraph of the purport. And in that purport, Prabhupada makes a very clear statement. He says that until and unless we come to the platform of wanting to serve the Lord without material consideration, then our devotional service will be uninterrupted. So that equation is very clear from the servant leader perspective. It is our motive that we must offer perspective. What is our motive of coming to serve? And that motive makes the difference. I think this morning, His Holiness Jayapataka Maharaj took up this very important verse, right? He took 2 verses from Kunti Mata. Nai varhati abhidatum vai. It is nicely stated that there must be a quality to our chanting and utterances. In the same way, when we want to become leaders, then it is very nicely stated that there must be a quality to how we approach service. It is not something that we should do because it is mechanical, but there must be a quality, a feeling to it. And that is how devotional service is. There's a beautiful verse from 9.463 of Bhagavatam. Aham bhakta paradino hi aswatantra iva dvija sadhu bi grista hridayo bhaktai bhakta jana priyaha. Krishna declares very clearly, and he declares it to the Brahmana who is Durvasa Muni. Right? Durvasa Muni's temper, of course, got the better of him. And you know that he became very offensive to Ambarish Maharaj. And instead of falling at Ambarish Maharaj's feet, right, in true, genuine service, he decided to counteract Sudarshan Chakra by first going to Brahma, then Lord Shiva, and finally even to Lord Vishnu at Vaikuntha. And the result was very simple. Come back to Ambarish and fall at his feet. And when he came back, at that point, before he comes back, Krishna as Lord Vishnu in Vaikuntha speaks this. And you can see this is so nice because it tells us what is the mood of the Lord. The Lord is our ultimate servant leader. Because here he says that actually, frankly speaking, I have no independence. I'm completely under the control of my devotees. So when devotees serve the Lord is always ready to serve devotees. And when the devotees see the Lord serving selflessly, they reciprocate again by serving even more selflessly. And that transcendental rasa continues between the devotee and the Lord. So just because when someone says, I'm not independent, I'm dependent on those whom I love, that is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of genuine strength because servant leadership is embedded in humility. Until that quality is there, it is very difficult for us to be effectively servant leaders. What will happen is that we may portray that we are servant leaders. until somebody says no to us. Everybody who says yes to us, I'm servant leader to you. But the moment someone says no to me or disagrees with me, I'm no more servant leader. I'm a demon leader. And that becomes very dangerous. So there must be humility, and the Lord is showing the way actually. So these are some points about servant leadership that we should reflect on. The first is, when we talk about servant leadership in devotional service, it actually means that all of us as leaders, we should actually prioritize. We should prioritize those whom we are serving. That is very important. If we don't prioritize their needs, if we don't approach our congregations and the devotees whom we are spending time with the idea that we should play a part in fostering their spiritual development, then what will happen is, it is the opposite. We will go into what is known as the traditional leadership mode, which is power and control. Very often, leadership has two facets. You could have a leader who actually has the mood of being a servant, but leading firmly. Or you could have a leader that says it's my way or the highway. And when that happens, right, it is the power base is actually in power and control. So then what happens is the priority is no longer the interest of the community, but the priority is what the leader wants. And sometimes what the leader wants may not be what the community wants. That's why Srila Prabhupada many times emphasized that our movement must be run by love and trust. Prabhupada used that a lot in his letters. Whenever there were disputes between leaders who were his disciples and they were in a congregation, he would write and he would state this important point. He would say, try to resolve your problems or try to see to the needs of the congregation. But he would use the words love and trust, because that's the essence of the mood of a servant leader. Now, as spiritual leaders, and I don't have to tell you this because you all are leading in some aspect or the other, you know you have an onerous responsibility. And your responsibility very often is to the congregation. When I say congregation, it doesn't mean 10,000 people. You could have just one devotee whom you are spending time with, cultivating and serving. And that devotee is your congregation. Sometimes when I speak to devotees and they tell me, Prabhu, I don't have a congregation, there are only 2 devotees I'm preaching to. But that's a congregation. Why does congregation imply big numbers? Why are even numbers important? Prabhupada said so many times that one moon is much better than many stars. Stars are just blinking and twinkling, but one moon is so wonderful. So we are in the business of actually nurturing quality. Quantity will come on its own, but where there is quality, quantity is naturally attracted to it. It comes as a byproduct of quality. So this is very important. When devotees understand that the temples and the centers that we serve, even a service I take, and I have a team with me, maybe flower decorations for the altar, and I'm given 3 other devotees to work with. It is a responsibility. How do I serve them? How do I lead them in this service? This is very important. So sometimes what happens is, when we are given a position of service, a responsibility, the congregation in all innocence and with goodwill, they sometimes elevate us on a high pedestal. And they give us so much respect, which is the Vaishnava etiquette. That Prabhu, Mataji, you're doing so much service, we look up to you. And that's the point. That is the point where we must understand that this significant power that we are entrusted with is actually not power, but it is actually an opportunity to do more service. The moment we can switch our lens to say, this is an opportunity to do more service, and the power that comes with it is actually to be utilized to create more service, to empower, to delegate, then the relationship between us and the devotees we are trying to serve or lead will be very congenial. Otherwise, what happens is, people will get fried. There are so many times when devotees just get tired. Prabhu, please don't put me in this team with this devotee because, it will be very difficult. It's only his way or the highway and I can't do anything. These things always we hear. And that comes very often because we have this. Now, when you look at the world of ISKCON, you read, for example, in ISKCON law, the duties of a temple president. The duties are so much. But the power given to a temple president is equally much, because power matches responsibility. When you look at the GBC role, when you look at zonal supervisors, regional secretaries, these are all positions of service. But if we are not careful, they become positions of power. And when they become positions of power minus the service, then what happens is the servant leader disappears and the leader with power and control appears. So therefore, this is actually the challenges that we face. If we are not careful, it's very easy to be swept away and think that we should rule by power and control rather than serve with love and trust. They are two different things. They may appear to be the same, but very often they are very different. What is the core teachings of servant leadership that we can find from the Gita? Gita has 3 very important verses, which I think we can touch on just for a while. The first is 3:19. I like this verse because when you read the purport and what Krishna has given, it makes a lot of sense. Tasmad asaktaha satatam karyam karma samachara asakto hi acharan karma param atnoti purushaha. Without being attached to the fruits of activities, one should act as a matter of duty. For by working without attachment, one attains the supreme. Prabhupada makes it much clearer in the purport. He says Arjuna is told he should fight in the battle of Kurukshetra. But fight for who? When leaders come forward to lead, we lead for who? In this case, the answer is very nice. In the interest of Krishna. And therefore, if we want to be servant leaders, the question we must ask every time we are trying to lead and serve, that we should be very aware. We are doing this in the interest of Krishna consciousness and in the interest of the community. That is very important. Therefore, Prabhupada makes a very bold statement. To be a good man or a non-violent man is a personal attachment. But to act on behalf of the Supreme is to act without attachment for the result. A Krishna conscious person has no attachment for the result, but acts on behalf of Krishna alone. He engages in all kinds of activities, but is completely non-attached. The challenge of servant leadership is actually attachment. Because when we become very attached to a particular leadership position, then what happens is we don't want to give it up. And very often we want to grow it. And very often devotees, Prabhupada writes in statements how presidents die in their office. They don't want to relinquish, they just die in their office. And Prabhupada says, very often devotees also, we should be very cautious. If we are given a service, we can do it. But it's not going to be eternal. We are going to die. And therefore, we should be empowering, we should be delegating. And Krishna is the ultimate person for us to actually offer everything that we do. So Krishna actually taught Arjuna how to be a leader on the battlefield. Undue attachment to designation is a challenge in servant leadership. But the solution to that is very nice. If our focus is on the welfare of others rather than our personal gain, we will find that we will actually be able to bring more love, more trust, and the congregation actually becomes happier because they feel cared for. They know that the priority is always how they are doing. It makes a big difference for them. But this does not mean that leaders don't look after themselves. Remember when I spoke about balancing? We balance our work. Leaders also have to balance family. Very often they have to balance their sadhana. Leaders must take care of themselves, but taking care of themselves in the mood of always serving others. Very simple example. All of us have flown on a flight, right? Most of us, I don't know anyone who has not gone on a plane. When you get on a plane, what happens? When you hear the announcements just before takeoff, you will always hear this announcement that comes about mask coming down, oxygen mask, and you have to put it on, right? If anything happens. Now, there's also an announcement that comes with it. Children also have their separate mask. But what do they tell you after that? They tell you to put on your mask first before you put it for the child. The usual instinct of the people on the plane is to say, if I'm a parent, I want to save my child first. So I will put the oxygen mask on the child. But the rationale is different. The rationale is if you cannot breathe at that point of time, how are you going to pass the oxygen mask to the child? You need to start breathing first before you can actually serve your child. That's the principle of servant leadership. It doesn't mean that leaders don't take care of themselves. But if you are, changing your car every year, and then the congregation is saying we are donating money, but we are not sure where the money is going, then you start thinking, am I taking too much care of myself? Or should I be using this money for the benefit of Krishna and the congregation? Right? So this is a very important point. We had a case a few years ago where a congregation came up to us and told us, we have noticed that our temple president is changing his car. It's an SUV car. He gets a brand new SUV car every 2 years. And yet, we have a donation drive every 6 months, and we are told that there's not enough money in the bank. Now, you put 2 and 2 together, and the congregation starts thinking, are we really being taken care of? Is Krishna being taken care of? Right? So these things happen. Right? And nonetheless, needless to say, when we conducted an investigation, it was found that quite a bit of, movement of monies where it shouldn't be going was going. Now that is a classic example of power, of no focus on what is priority for the congregation. But it can happen. So leaders need to look out for themselves, but it shouldn't be at the expense of the devotees at hand. So one important principle in servant leadership, if you want to take back, is to really meditate on the point of detachment. Not just as a principle, mind you, but also as practice. And this is not something that can happen overnight. It needs to be cultivated. And if you surround yourself with leaders who are willing to help each other and point out that this is a blind spot, then detachment becomes more achievable. This is a very important verse that we have heard many times. Ananyas chintayantu mam. Krishna says, if you're exclusively devoted to me, I carry what you lack and I preserve what they have. This mood of Ananya Bhakti is very important for servant leaders. Why? Because sometimes servant leaders only think that it's their effort that is changing the community. It's my work. If I was not there, you wouldn't be getting all this. If not for me, you won't have these facilities. Very often, position of responsibility turns into a position of ownership. I own all that's happening. You all are just, there, but basically it's me. I'm driving everything. But Krishna says a principle that is very important. The principle here is, if we lack something, it's not anybody who can fill the gap. It's only Krishna who can fill the gap. So a servant leader will always remember he is nimitta mata, bhavya savya sachi. He's an instrument. But if he claims that I'm the reason why you're doing well, Prabhu, I'm the reason why you're developing, Mataji, then, the servant leadership, the form of detachment that we want is not present. So, a takeaway from this verse is, a leader who serves with genuine love and care, they will be guided in their action by Krishna. They will. Because Krishna is Antaryami. He is in our hearts. And we must have faith that if we are serious about being servant leaders, Krishna will give us the intelligence to do that. Nobody else can give like Krishna does. And this is the faith that is unique to devotional service. If you tell a leader in the corporate world who doesn't believe in Krishna, don't worry. Somewhere along the line, you are not the reason for the company's success. It's actually Krishna. They will never get it. But we are in a unique position to understand that the X factor is always Krishna. And when a leader can understand that and he shares it or she shares it with the devotees in the community, you know how empowering it is for the devotees to see that this principle is being observed. So this is a very important point. One last verse. These two sets of verses come from chapter 12. And they describe servant leadership. Very nice. Adveshta Sarva Bhutanam verse. One who is not envious, but is a kind friend to all living entities. Who does not think himself a proprietor and is free from false ego. Equal in happiness and distress. Tolerant, satisfied, self-control, engaged in devotional service with determination. Such a devotee of mine is very dear to me. So these qualities from Bhagavad Gita are very important for leaders. One is being friendly, Maitreya. Right? One of the three things that Parikshit Maharaj asked in the first canto, 19th chapter. Right? There's a verse, Punascha Bhuyat Bhagavate Anantaha, 119:16, I think. There, Parikshit Maharaj asked three things. He tells the assembly that if I have to come back to this material world again, because I'm not qualified enough, I only ask for 3 things. One is unflinching attachment to the Supreme Lord. Second is service to his devotees. And third is friendly relations with all living entities. Beautiful. The last 2 are very important for leaders, because if we have the mood that we are here and we are friendly and we want to be kind and compassionate, then Krishna will allow us that facility. And therefore, being loving, compassionate, and being free from malice. Leaders must be, Prabhupada said, leaders are like fathers and mothers. Prabhupada very often said that. A king or a leader, sometimes children may come and say harsh things to parents. But do the parents bear malice to their children when that happens? We don't. We have the maturity to know that at the end of the day, they are younger, they are more inexperienced, and we will not do what they are doing. We will not desecrate ourselves to that point. You've heard of this slogan, right? When a dog bites the man, it's no news. Because it's very normal. Dog bites. But when a man bites a dog, it's front page news. Because that's normally not what we will be doing. So therefore, malice is a very important thing to handle with leaders. Sometimes leaders want to be surrounded by yes men and yes women. And they only want people who will hear their vision. But a servant leader is ready to hear everyone, because he knows or she knows that they are not always right. And that this is a more consultative way of growing a congregation. And that is a very strong element of servant leadership. Servant leaders consult. They ask. And not just ask, but they also take feedback. If it's challenging to put the feedback into motion, they will explain. They will say, Prabhu, Mataji, I've heard your feedback, but I have this challenge. What do you think? Can we get past it? That is engagement. So that part of malice is very important. Because when you do that, then the environment is people trust you. They respect you, and you will also trust them, and you will also respect them. And this also builds openness and transparency. Without openness and transparency, leadership can sometimes be very suspect, which is very, very important today. Everyone who wants to donate today wants a receipt. Gone are the days when you just donate and say, Maharaj or Prabhu, it doesn't matter, I've just given it to Krishna. And then no receipts. And we have had cases where no receipts means the money never went where it was supposed to go. So much for love and trust, right? So this is very, very important. So therefore, we talked about detachment, we talked about friendliness and compassion, but there's also the point of renunciation of proprietorship. Being detached is one thing, but understanding that the congregation is not yours is a deeper point. Sometimes we have this habit, we have this way of talking. He's my man, or this person is from my congregation, or they're under me. Yes, they may be with you in the congregation, but sometimes these words reflect how we are actually thinking very subtly. And therefore, servant leaders must be keenly aware that whatever that is given to us is given by Krishna. If Krishna has given us a service to serve a community, that community belongs to Krishna. It doesn't belong to us. Because if it did, then when we die, the community will come with us. But I can guarantee you, when you die, they will pray for you, but they will stay where they are. They're not going to come with you. So therefore, it doesn't belong to us. So this proprietorship is very, very important. We have seen leaders fighting over each other because one devotee from one congregation one day walked into another congregation. And then some spies told them, oh, Prabhu, you have jumped ship. And that becomes a major problem. Two leaders become very unhappy with each other. But the root cause is not the devotees. Instead of finding out why the devotee went there, was it some unhappiness, some problems? Instead, it becomes, oh, you poached the devotee, or you are accusing me of not doing enough for the devotee. That can also become a big source of conflict. We have seen this many times. And looking at all of you shaking your heads, I think you have also seen it many times. So that's part of it. Let's hear from Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada had two very important letters that he spoke about servant leader. And frankly, the entire presentation, if nothing got through, at least this slide should get through, because these two are very important. Prabhupada was very, very good at two things. He could empower and he could delegate. If you look at how he managed ISKCON, he did it by, in those disciples whom he felt were ready to move forward, he empowered them. And he got them to do wonderful preaching. He sent Malati, Sham Sundar. He empowered them and said, go to UK and do what you have to do. And they did. They did. So he served them with his love. He gave them so much of empowerment. He gave them so much of faith in themselves. He made them feel confident. And he was always there for them when they were in difficulty. They would write to Prabhupada, we are in London, you're moving around, we are in difficulty. And what did he do? At some point, he would always write back, encouraging them. He was not saying, well, I set you a goal, why haven't you achieved it? This is your KPI, have you reached it? He didn't do that. He just gave them love and he trusted them. And that empowered them. And see what happened in UK. See what happened in London. It was an explosion, right? And sometimes what Prabhupada did was he would delegate. He would not give everything to someone, but he would give them something and then he would lead them. That's what he did with many disciples. He would tell them to go ahead and do certain tasks, but as a very kind father, he would be watching out. He would guide them, he would steer them. And if nothing happened, he was the emblem of humility. Humility. There's a famous point in Lilamrita when Prabhupada was in Amsterdam, and there was a temple, there was a deity welcoming ceremony. The deities were going to be placed there, and Srila Prabhupada was there, and there was pressure because it was going live. Right? It was going live. So everything had to be done properly. And then what happened was Prabhupada had set up the Havan, and he was going to do a fire sacrifice. And so what did he do? He turned to one of the they were all very young devotees, right? He turned to the temple president and he looked at it and he said, the Havan was very bare. There was no rice, there was no fruits, there was no vegetables around it. So then he turned to the temple president, he said, get me some fruits. So temple president was delegated that work. And so he thought, Prabhupada wants fruits. So he rushed to the kitchen and he told the cooks there, Prabhupada wants fruits. And so the devotees there said, Prabhupada wants fruits, we have to prepare fruits. And so Prabhupada was sitting there, waiting for fruits to come, to be put there, and they brought this big bowl of salad for Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada's face just changed. He was just thinking, he didn't know, I think he was very, very transcendently upset. But then when he looked that way, now, there was this devotee boy who would come to the temple. Now, the incident tells us he was long-haired, a little bit of a hippie, but he would come and chant for a while and then he would leave. He was seated next to Prabhupada. And when he saw Prabhupada looking like that, he came close to Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, just chant. Just chant. Right? Just chant the holy names of the Lord. Prabhupada just looked at him, long look at him. And then Prabhupada took up his beads and he chanted. Now that is servant leadership at the highest. Because just think of the number of things that he had to do at that point. He was patient. He had to delegate. Delegation went all wrong. But he was still very, very patient. And at the end, when someone who was really spaced out told him just chant, did it prick his pride? Did he think, who am I and who are you? He just chanted. He just chanted. Mahaprabhu was the leader of all the devotees, right? And Amog, the son-in-law of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, insulted him when he came to have prasadam at Bhattacharya's house. He did that twice. Bhattacharya was very upset. And he would say, how can a sannyasi eat food which is fit for a king? And so Bhattacharya fell at the feet of Mahaprabhu and said, I have sinned today because of my son-in-law. What did Mahaprabhu say? Mahaprabhu said something astonishing. He said, Bhattacharya, what fault is there in what Amog had said? After all, I am a sannyasi. Why am I eating so much? That's a point that is correct. This is servant leader. a servant leader never lets pride come in the way of serving. If something is pointed out to him or her, they should have the capacity to be able to accept it and based on love and trust, work on it. Mahaprabhu showed it, Srila Prabhupada showed it, and so his letter in 1972 is very nice. Our leaders shall be careful not to kill the spirit of enthusiastic service, which is individual and spontaneous and voluntary. They should try always to generate some atmosphere of fresh challenge to the devotees, so that they will agree enthusiastically to rise and meet it. That is the art of management, to draw out spontaneous, loving service of sacrificing some energy for Krishna. But where are so many expert managers? All of us should become expert managers and preachers. This is servant leadership. What Prabhupada is saying here is that a servant leader never stifles the community. In fact, she or he will be able to bring the best out of a community. And that is a very good symptom of a servant leader. Because everyone feels that they are free to express themselves in whichever way. If someone has a strength in book distribution, then fan that. If someone has a strength in preaching, fan it. If someone, can do very, very interesting dishes that may attract a whole different crowd of people, then fan the flame. That is a servant leader. And not say, this I don't like, that personally is not up to me, or, in this congregation, this is the only thing that we're going to emphasize. I'm sorry, everything else is out. Prabhupada didn't want that. Prabhupada wanted expert managers. There's another letter he wrote. So these two things are always side by side, Maya and Krishna. Krishna is service, Maya is sense gratification. So every moment we are prone to be subjugated by either of them. Our duty is therefore to be very, very careful. The poison is personal ambition. The poison is personal ambition. And that, I think, is a very important instruction to all of us by Srila Prabhupada. Whenever I read this letter, I feel Prabhupada is reminding us very seriously, be careful of personal ambition. Where there is personal ambition, there is no room for servant leadership. It's very difficult. So if I want to conclude on these points, right? If we want to take out what are important traits, then these are some traits that we can offer perspective. Selflessness. Selflessness means undue attachment should be avoided. The word undue is important. Naturally, there must be some attachment to a cause, but undue attachment to results, instead of focusing on the well-being of the followers, is sometimes something that leaders fall prey to. We want results and we push a congregation to the point that they are delivering. We get the credit and they become fried. And that's very important. We need to be able to strike a balance. Sometimes a congregation must produce results, but what happens is they may become not very empowered, they may be burnt out, they may be exhausted because they're being pushed. Instead of being nourished, they are being pushed. So we need to find that delicate balance. It's not easy, but it needs to be addressed. If we are addressing it, Krishna in 922 will help us. But if we don't even address it, then he will not, because we are not actually thinking that way. So this is a very important element that we must be remembering. In Singapore, for example, and I'm sure this is what happens here, many devotees work long hours. And, Monday to Friday, to get them to actually do the things that you can do in maybe brahmachari in a temple is vastly different. So devotee leaders must be very attuned to that. What can they achieve? We want more devotees to come to Krishna consciousness, but not at the expense of the leaders who are working with us, feeling that they are not being taken care of, feeling that they're just being driven to the ground. Supposing we have a fundraising and we set goals, and if the goals are not achieved, how do we react to that? That's also an indication of what kind of a leader we are. Are we going to come heavy? Or are we going to inspire? Or are we going to tell them, encourage them that you've done well, we appreciate that, but we are still a little short, what shall we do? Then they feel that this is not just my problem, it's everybody's problem, but we have to do it for Krishna. So it's little things, but it does make a difference. And that leads to the other point, compassion. When leaders are empathetic, the word empathy is so important. Sympathy is sometimes when you feel sorry for someone. But empathy is very strong for a leader because they can put themselves in your position and you feel that they understand your challenge. That kind of support becomes very important to devotees. The other thing about servant leadership is actually integrity. Because when leaders become role models, they don't wait for others to behave well. They start behaving properly. If their ethics are in the right place, then what happens is the congregation becomes happy. They know that they are working with leaders who are honest, who are transparent, and who really have nothing to hide. And that makes it so much easier to inspire people. And a servant leader serves the community best by being accountable, by being transparent. And that is very important. So as a leader, servant leader, a servant leader should not become a servant leader just because he will become the most popular person. That's also not right. Sometimes we must ask ourselves this question: what are we doing as leaders? Are we in leadership because of what we call in Latin lex populi, meaning we want to be the most popular person? Okay, so this leader is like Hiranyakashipu. So if I become very, very nice, everybody will come to me and I'll become very popular. Is that what we really want? If that's what we want, then we are really not servant leaders actually. We just want to be popular. But servant leaders can also be honest. We can tell a devotee, Prabhu, I'm serving you, but I can say that these are some issues and we need to discuss them. So I'm not here for the popular vote, but I'm here to serve you. And an honest friend is a friend who's serving. You know that. You know you have a good friend when someone can point out something which is not palatable for others. And you know you have someone who is able to be trusted. A servant leader must be able to do that. He or she must be able to do that in Vaishnava etiquette. Bring them away, speak to them confidentially, explain to them problems, not embarrass them, not make them feel small in front of a whole congregation. Don't pass snide remarks, in an indirect manner, saying things about them that everybody knows, they also feel it, but you will deny it when it comes across. This is the start of politics. And that's also a big problem if we are not careful. So servant leadership needs balance. And the other thing that is really important, and this is needed for our movement, because our movement is very poor in succession. Many of our leaders are growing older and older, but many of our leaders have yet to find successes. And only until they are pushed, then they begin to think of successes. But we don't realize that succession planning is a component of servant leadership. Because if a leader is a servant, he or she will know that I have an expiry date, just like everybody else. And the most important part of my expiry date is I should be useful before I expire. And the best way to be useful is to grow a leadership that can replace me even more effectively. And all the better, all the faster. That is very important. So a servant leader will not just do things by himself or herself. Like Prabhupada, they will empower, delegate. They will grow and develop. And they will support you with everything that you need. That is a good way to grow. I remember Jet Vaita Maharaj was handling the BBT for many years. He said that he once told us that when I turn 50, or as I'm shaving my head, when I see the first grey hair, I will retire from BBT. And he did that actually at 54. Because he said, I saw my first grey hair and I decided to retire. And since then, he built up an entire team and he gave them, a lot of guidance. And today we have another generation of devotees who are working in the BBT. You saw Anantita Prabhu today, right, for the Indian BBT. Well-qualified individuals. But they found their space because the leadership has given them a chance to grow. So that's very important. And that's why we should avoid the one-man show. I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll do everything. And so when the president suddenly falls sick, the whole community will collapse. Right? So that becomes very dangerous. And with empowerment and succession comes accountability. Sometimes what happens is leaders want everyone to be accountable to me. You must be accountable to me. I need to know what's happening with every one of you. But nobody needs to know what is happening to me. That is not servant leadership. Servant leadership means that we should also be accountable as leaders to our congregation. They should know what we are doing. They should know how the accounts are doing. They should know how the financial dealings are going on. They should know where Lakshmi is moving. They should know what we are spending. They should know our lifestyle. That is very important. So accountability will really help a community. If you take all those traits, and if you want to put them into practical application, then these are some thoughts that I can leave you with today. One is duty with devotion. If we approach leadership like Krishna told Arjuna to approach his battle, then we will feel a sense of duty. When a leader feels a great sense of duty to all the devotees he's serving, that leader becomes a true servant leader. Because they are driven not by ambition, but they are actually driven by duty. Sometimes leaders feel that we have a trajectory. Now I'm going to be temple president. In 2 years, I must become regional secretary. Then after that, I must move into GBC. It's a personal ambition. Sure, you may have it, and that's fine because you want to serve. But it cannot be at the cost of your congregation. It cannot be that you are building everything, but the main focus is you. The focus is the congregation. That's very important. Did we ever see or hear Srila Prabhupada having this personal ambition? Prabhupada had no personal ambition. His ambition was everyone should become a pure devotee. Very simple. That was his ambition. I want all my young boys and girls to become pure devotees. And he writes in the 4th canto in the purport of Dhruva Maharaj that if I have one disciple who can become a pure devotee, then I pray that he will take me back home, back to Godhead. You see, a true servant leader, not even thinking that he is bringing everyone back, because really truly he is, but saying that maybe a disciple can bring me back. That is duty with devotion. And we should always communicate. A servant leader at the very start will start talking to the community and say, we are invested in how you grow. So you tell us how you want to grow as devotees. What are your strengths? Are you good in something, Prabhu? Are you good in something, Mataji? Were you already, trained in something else? Tell us. And then, do you want to grow in that area? Fine. We will help you to grow in that area. You tell us what you need, and we will support you. How will you feel when you hear a leader speak that way? You feel inspired, and you feel that there's a chance for me to grow and to do something for Krishna. So that both of this will create a supportive environment. And this environment will mean that not only are you a servant leader, but you are also growing servant leaders. Others also have the mood of serving and leading. Leading doesn't become a word which is filled with designation. It becomes a word which is imbued with service, which is very important. Balancing leadership and service. Sometimes we need to lead with firmness. And sometimes firmness can be mistaken for, you're very proud, Prabhu. But sometimes a leader has to take difficult decisions. A leader has to say, look, in this case, I have to take the final call. I'm sorry, but the buck stops with me. And I feel in this situation, we need to move forward. These servant leaders can sometimes be misunderstood. There are servant leaders who are firm. Just like, for example, Prabhupada gave the example of Narada Muni and the snake. You remember Narada Muni preached to the cobra and the snake, and then the snake became totally ahimsa, and people tried to kill him. And Narada Muni told him, I didn't ask you to bite or strike, but I didn't say you can't hiss from time to time, isn't it? So sometimes servant leader is not a weak leader sitting down and saying, Prabhu, you can just walk over me whenever you want. No, a servant leader knows when he has to lead, and he also must know when he has to serve. That is very important. And handling difficult situations. This is where servant leadership is really tested. In difficult situations, you can either do the big cover-up, and everybody's thinking something happened, but nobody knows what happens. Or you can be honest with the community and get the community engaged in solving a problem, which is probably going to be much more empowering. And at the end of such a crisis, the devotees will probably respect you more for having been honest, transparent, accountable, and engaging, which is very important. You all feel that you all cross the line together and not just one or two persons. That is what a congregation needs. I want to end with 2 points here. In Lord Ramchandra's rule, if you read Bhagavatam 9 canto, you'll find two words are used. And these are actually symptoms of how leadership is efficient. If your congregation is very often satisfied, if they come to the temple and they don't feel like their blood pressure is increasing and they're going to get a heart attack, or they're worried that something is not being done, if they are free of anxiety, right, then it is a very good indication that the leadership is actually making the congregation very happy. So finally, after all the big words that I've used here, the real point that's really important, the test, the litmus test is your congregation inspired? Are they happy? Do they feel loved and cared for? And do they feel that they have a voice? Are they happy to keep coming back? Not because I got no other place, Prabhu, I have to come here. Or because I want to come here and I want to do more service. These are very important questions. And Bhagavatam gives us the answers. So a happy congregation of devotees, very important, right? Lokanath Maharaj said this, happier devotees translates to more devotees. Very simple formula. The happier the devotees, the more devotees will come. Happier devotees always make more devotees. If you're not happy, how are you going to make others happy? It's not going to happen. And one last point, the great example of Prithu Maharaj. I love this verse. Look at this verse. This King Prithu will be very, very kind to all citizens. Even though a poor person may trample over the king's head, by violating the rules and regulations, the king, out of his causeless mercy, will be forgetful and forgiving. As a protector of the world, he will be as tolerant as the earth itself. You can read this later, but the point is that leaders must have very, very accessible levels of tolerance. You can actually access a leader's tolerance. Know that the leader will be tolerant enough to hear, to forgive and forget, and not mark you. It's a horrible feeling for a congregation member to feel marked. Oh no, I've got a sword over my head because I had a run-in with the president. Now I'm finished. Whatever I do, I'm blacklisted. That is a horrible feeling to feel. And that we should never have, actually. And Prabhupada gave disciples work. I've already given you this. I've gone through this, actually. I want to end with this one. Yes. The mantra of the servant leader. Empower and delegate. For you to do this, you have to do all the other things, actually. And this is the prayer, right? These two prayers are very nice. Krishna, let's end by remembering that Krishna is the ultimate servant leader. Maharaj Parikshit heard about how Krishna did so much service to the Pandavas. He was a chariot driver. He was a president of the assembly. He became a messenger, right? Which is a very menial service. He was a charioteer. Don't forget, being a charioteer was not easy. It was not like Arjuna was telling Krishna, Krishna, if you don't mind, you're the supreme personality of Godhead, but please turn right. And no, it's not going to happen in the battlefield, right? He won't even use the word please. They would have to kick to indicate right, left, it's like, turn right, turn left. It was not easy. And Krishna became a night watchman. He was a night watchman. I didn't have the synonyms here because I didn't have space. But if you look at the synonyms of this verse, Prabhupada expands it. Night watchman with a sword always in his hand. That's how Krishna was trained. That's how he was a night watchman. He was standing guard for the Pandavas during the Mahabharata war. He did all this according to the will of the Pandavas, obeying them like a servant and offering obeisances like one younger in years. When Maharaj Parikshit heard this, he was overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. And this is the prayer of a servant leader. Beautiful prayer from Prahlad Maharaj. May there be good fortune throughout the universe. May all envious persons be pacified. May all living entities become calm by practicing Bhakti Yoga. For by accepting devotional service, they will think of each other's welfare. Therefore, let us all engage in the service of the Supreme Transcendence, Lord Sri Krishna, and always remain absorbed in thought of Him. This is a nice mood to have for a leader, for a devotee, for a living entity. Thank you very much for your time, Prabhus and Matajis. Are there? Thank you. Maybe we can have 5 minutes if there are any reflections, thoughts, sharings. That would really be nice, if anybody wants to share anything. Yes, Prabhu, please.
Oh, I have a small
Yes. Is that working, Prabhu? Just turn it on. Okay. Okay, maybe loud enough. I'll repeat it. It's okay.
Like in one of the Prabhupada letters, okay, is there either we are contact with either Maya or either Krishna.
Yes.
Every moment.
Yes.
So when we are between the devotees, okay. So at that moment, okay, we are always thinking about Krishna because of devotees' blessings.
I hope so.
Yes, but when they are in the workplace, in the
Yes.
office,
Yes.
so at that moment it's very difficult to think about Krishna Prabhu. So how do we think about Krishna at that moment when we are on the working place, when we are not in between the devotees circle?
Simple answer. To the extent that your sadhana is quality, to the extent that you really immerse yourself in good association when you have the opportunity for good association, that association and the benefit of your sadhana will allow you to be more aware of Krishna. So that even if the challenges of material affairs are there, Krishna will pop up in your mind and pop up in your heart. And that will give you the soothing reality that you are protected. And it will give you the intelligence on how to navigate difficult situations. If we feel that we don't have that, then we have to go back to the drawing board and we have to work on the quality of our devotional service. We should also understand that it may not be practical for us. Sometimes we figuratively think we should be able to remember Krishna. In other words, it's like all the time remember Krishna to the exclusion of everything else. That's not possible. If a surgeon is operating, he can remember Krishna, but he must also be operating. That's important. So I think that's the key to it, Prabhu. And servant leaders, to pull it back to what we're asking and talking about, servant leaders' sadhana, servant leaders' spiritual life has got to be their building block. If that is not there, it's very difficult. When servant leaders get too much into management to the exclusion of chanting, sadhana, they don't read enough, then what happens is they become managers and they don't become servant leaders. I hope it's helpful. Thank you. Anything else? Yes, Prabhu.
One question. This is connected to the previous session that we had also.
Yes, yes.
Just a thought, because we were talking about the culture in the organization.
Yes.
And with respect to the concept of a servant leader, now oftentimes a leader is faced with the situation that while we understand that as a servant leader we should be always trying to advise and inspire in a way that is most beneficial to the ones whom we are, providing support and care. There are also challenges with respect to, the institutional KPIs that need to be met, right, which are also serving a purpose, obviously. And many leaders, have that challenge that sometimes they know that I have to achieve both, but sometimes that pressure of, the institutional KPIs, whether it be money, preaching, services, whatever, there is an impulse to, push things to, the ones who are under our care, which we may not be fully convinced is necessarily in their best interest.
Yes, Prabhu.
So as a preacher, and this is a very difficult subject.
It is, because I think it's always the delicate balance.
Yeah, so any thoughts around this, or how you as a leader, what is the guiding? Because I know it cannot be a black and white answer.
Yeah.
Right? So what are the factors?
If you ask me personally, Prabhu, I think the most important thing is whatever leadership which is apex, at whatever point in a country, regional, I think the leadership has to be very sensitive about KPIs as we use. I think the leadership's main KPI, again, and I don't like that word actually, I think a goal or objective is better, but it's so used now, right? We'll just use it. But I think the goal of any congregation and the leadership must be always to be sensitive to how much a congregation or community can actually handle a particular goal. Is it achievable? Will it burn out the community? Will it not? For me, that is paramount. If, for example, I would love all the preachers in Singapore to be able to preach as many times as they can in a week. But they are struggling themselves just to be able to come home and have their own time with their family. So to be able to expect them to do that is unrealistic, it is unnecessary, and in the long run, they will just become fried out. So then it is my duty to adjust my initial goals, bearing in mind what levels of possible dealings, what levels of what possibilities the other devotees who are working with me can actually be able to handle. I think that should be the priority. If that is the priority, then the numbers game isn't important finally. If the devotees can distribute 2 books in a week, and that's the best they could do, all glories to their effort. All glories to their effort. If someone can distribute 55 books in that time, all glories to their effort. But there's no comparison, because both are doing what they can according to their capacity. And if we feel someone can do better, then it's our duty to sit with them personally and inspire them, not to force them. So I think the issue is really the goals that the leadership sets. That can only come as a reflection of whether that leadership is servant leader based or KPI based. Is that helpful, Prabhu? That's just my opinion. Others may differ. But I have found it to be effective, personally.
Also, just a corollary to this. So when as a counselor or as a preacher, we're looking at a particular family, and like we were, generally we agree that a happy family is the best preaching, isn't it? And we know in today's life, it's so challenging even for the family to spend some quality time even with each other.
Yes.
And do their sadhana, take
Yes.
care of their health, and on top of that do services.
Yes, Prabhu.
Right? So, how important is for a family who's struggling with time internally? They're doing their sadhana, they're taking care of each other, in a reasonable way. How important it is for them to extend themselves to organizational services, and I'm not saying just service, they're doing their services within their home setup,
Right.
but to involve in organizational services where they feel a bit stretched.
I would ask them the question. I wouldn't know the answer, but if I feel,
Stretched, so let's say they feel.
then I would tell them, Prabhu, you're going to be stretched, and this is how much stretch you may be. Go home, think about it. If you're happy to do it, come and try it. Try it for a week or 2. Try it for a month or 2. Let's do a pilot project. If you all can handle it, well and good. If you can't, don't worry about it. We will readjust the schedule. I think that's how we would work. We would consult. We would develop it. It's not cast in stone. And it's always going to be fluid. That's how I would do it personally. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you, everyone. I've taken more time than necessary. Krishna Kathamrit Prabhu, thank you so much for organizing all this for us and to all the other organizers. And I've not had the good fortune of meeting every one of you personally, but I'm really happy and very honored to have your association. You have given me, so much of inspiration, and I pray that you will be happy in your devotional service. And I hope these things will be helpful for you. And at the end of the day, Krishna will guide us if we really have the right intentions. And I'm sure that we should always prioritize the fact that finally, purity is the force. The more pure we are in our intentions, the more Krishna will help us and the community. But if our intentions are filled with everything else and is diluted, to that extent, right, we will get what we deserve. And that is true of, I think, many leaders' experience. Jai Shla Prabhupada ki. Ananta Gauri Vaishnavrinda ki. Nitai Gaura Premanande. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Devakinandan Prb ki. Jai.
Hare Krishna, Ananta Gauri Vaishnavrinda ki.